Okay, so you spent an embarrassing amount of hours playing Jedi Fallen Order. You explored every planet on the game, and you fell in love with it. Same. And now, a little bit of a spoiler warning here, but now you're feeling as though the customization of the lightsaber and being able to build your own, now you want to build Cal Kestis's lightsaber? We'll do that one later. But what about the little droid that runs around with you? That droid had some of the coolest little features, cool sidekick that was very useful. I loved the BD-1 concept, so much so that I decided that I wanted to build a BD-1. Kind of like this guy here. I 3D printed this a few months back as a prototype because as soon as I played the game, I knew that I was going to want to build this 1-to-1 scale. So I decided to start off with a little miniature version of it. This was based off of print time. This was a very long print for how small it was. That was probably like an 8-hour print for that little guy. That is essentially what we are shooting for, except for hopefully stand about to our knee when we're done. We'll hop over to SketchUp and we'll throw all those BD-1 pieces, and then we will put a person that's about my size beside it, and we'll see about how tall he will be in comparison to how tall I will be. He should be about knee height if I had to guess. So that being said, does anybody want to build a 1-to-1 scale real size robot? And I'm being for real, like a real droid, not a real, okay, it's not going to be like a real droid that like function. I'm going to try to make the joints articulate and whatnot. Not like a real working droid. But do you guys want to, do you want me to show you? If you guys want to know how to build a 1-to-1 scale BD-1 as accurate as I'm going to be able to make it with possibly some moving articulating joints, if nothing, a good starting point for if anybody knows how to do like robotics and you want to try to make it like a working robot, this would be a really good starting point. So I'm going to show you guys how I did this from start to finish with finding the model off of Thingiverse to the mesh mixer to Cura from the layer height and how I slide, how it went from a 3D model in Thingiverse to it being able to work on my 3D printer and then epoxied together, bondoed, glued, basically the assembly. The assembly is where we will get to eventually. Before we can get to BD-1 being in three-dimensional real object, we have to start out on the computer. We will hop into it right now. Over to thingiverse.com. You've ever seen me do it, it's probably come from Thingiverse. Type BD-1, hop over to this model that you see here. Felix S was the creator of this model. Every model is broken down into a bunch of tiny pieces to fit most print beds. And although these pieces did fit my print bed, they were going to take forever. So I decided to hop over to a program called Mesh Mixer, which would allow me to break these up into smaller sections. I experimented with this program previously when I was making a lamp for somebody. It's basically a program that you can hollow things out or split things up, all depending on how you want it to fit your print bed. Maybe is the most support efficient. I think you can even build your own supports in the system. I will leave links for all of this stuff in this video. Carrying over to Mesh Mixer, basically the file that you saved from Thingiverse, wherever you saved it, you will import it as a 3D model into this program. And I went in here and I added a edit plane cut. A plane cut allows me to do just that, cut something in half. I found a good little spot, time efficient print, as well as a space efficient. So I'm gonna hit keep both because it usually wants to get rid of one. I'm going to choose to keep both with a minimal fill, and then I'm going to separate those shells, and now I've got two separate pieces of a model, and I can take those two separate pieces, export them, and now hop over to Cura. Cura is the slicer program of my preference. It's what I like to use most of the time. After you hop into Cura, you're going to go in and do the same thing you just did on Mesh Mixer, except for you're going to import the model you just exported, broken down however you wanted to break it down. Every piece of this model was broke down to a 0.2 layer height. I think it began with a skirt. I was having plate adhesion difficulty, so I ended up going with a raft, and long story short, it made everything a lot easier. But for the most part, everything was at 0.2 layer height with 20% infill. That's really the only fancy things you need to know. Usually, depending on what slicer program you use, if you change something, it will automatically lock those numbers in where they should be. And so I would just run with those. You can experiment with those if you want to. I have experimented with my numbers in the past. I just kind of went with what's already in here, and everything has kind of worked out for me. So I'm not going to break down every single one of those numbers. I did have support. I did have adhesion. Everything at 0.2 layer height with 20% infill. So I imported one of what we exported earlier. Then I imported the second one just to kind of give you an idea of what this would look like put together. You will see that with two of them in there, it's going to take 2 days. But just with one, it's 23 hours. Yeah, 23 hours is a long time. And if you're wondering, is it worth it to go in there and print a 23-hour print? 100%. I went in and imported every single one of the pieces to get a rough estimate of the commitment that it was going to take to do this. And yes, I like to write things down because I'm old school, but I have a journal where I document all that stuff down. I knew exactly how long each piece was going to take, and this is a total of 300 print hours. So yes, that's a lot of printing, but to me, yes, it was 100% worth it. I mean, come on, I made a robot. I made a robot. So after that, I threw it into SketchUp, the person that's about my height. So about knee level is what we guessed. It looks like that's about what it's going to be. Throwing it into SketchUp was cool because I could use SketchUp to take all those pieces that were exported. I manually put in there and pieced them together like that so that I had an idea of what I was doing in physical form. And now that I have SketchUp open and I can guide myself, we are just about ready for the assembly. So without further ado, let's hop over to that. All right, roughly 6 months later, here we are. We've got ourselves a finished BD-1. Always so satisfying when you set a 6-month project or a year-long project and you commit to it and you finish it, because it's ultimately the best payoffs out there is those long projects that you put time into. So shouts out to all the makers out there who commit themselves and finish those projects. I also understand not finishing projects. I've got a lot of projects that I get halfway through and then I set it aside because I just can't quite figure out where I'm going with it. It's totally fine. I want to also apologize in advance for this final video, the reduction in audio quality, because my original microphone has crapped out on me for the moment, so I am using a different microphone, so that's why the audio sounds. Jumping right into it, there was a couple of really cool things that I thought of along the way for this guy that I did not originally plan on doing. One of those things being the tubes and the legs. I am well aware to anybody out there that's probably driving crazy that they are put in the wrong spots. It's okay. I will justify why I put the tubes where I put them. So they should have actually gone from the inside, directly center of the inside of where the knee bends here, and it should have connected somewhere down here in the center of the ankle. There's a clear spot where it does go. However, there is a screw on the outside of each of these knees that I didn't want to weaken those joints by putting a screw on one side and then screwing a hole through the other side. It made me nervous, so I went with a little spot right beside it, and then I tucked it into the ankle down here to prevent him from leaning forward. I originally did want him to have articulating joints. It got to the point where his head got so heavy that as the joints were put together, as I positioned him, the head was causing the joints did not lock in quite as tightly as they should have, which was totally fine. They're still movable. I can still reposition him if I want to. I just so happen to have him positioned in a way that's perfectly balanced for the moment until I can figure out a way to maybe tighten those joints up a little bit. But that is why the tubes are placed where they are. He's not weak. I mean, he definitely holds his own. Other than the tubes, the only thing that I added that was not originally going to be on there was this little headpiece. I did notice that he had a couple of tubes running from his head from this little box up here, which I believe is the syringe spring thing that pops up and heals you in the game. I may be wrong about that, but I believe that's what this contraption is supposed to be. Also take into account the creator of this model created it before the game even came out. So it was all just based on reference photos and things at the time. So it's not 100% accurate to the game. I'm completely fine with it because he's equally cool. There's not a lot of differences between this model and the final version of the Jedi Fallen Order BD-1, but there are some subtle differences that I did notice throughout the thing. But it was like, you know what, I really like this model. A couple of other cool things that I thought about along the way. Shouts out to my buddy Carrie over at Standard Design Co. We had kind of collaborated on this, and it's kind of an obvious thing that I didn't think about before when I was doing some of these older helmets, but I realized that epoxy gives like a reflective glass style effect. Super cool thing that he had done on some tables and stuff with woodwork. So it was just an idea that I tossed over. I said, you know, do you think maybe epoxy would give his lens like a glass look. I had thought about putting like a piece of plastic over his lens to give it some sort of a, you know, a realistic look, but then I thought, you know what, I could probably paint epoxy over this and it would give it that same shiny effect, so that's what I went with, was epoxy on his lens. I airbrushed a little bit of blue on it because he does have a blue light that comes from the bag. I also ended up going with an extra set of magnets for the inside of his head. There's one magnet is epoxy to the inside of this one to its frame, and then I have this other magnet that is just loose. I could separate this and put it back in here, but I've got a couple of strategically placed magnets on the inside of his face now that hold this with no problem whatsoever. The other cool thing was the lights that ended up going around the backside of his head, nice and bright. You don't want to look at them like in person. If you look at them for too long, they're pretty blinding. They're actually very bright. This was kind of a last minute touch too. This is not accurate whatsoever. It was just my little Easter egg touch that I added to it. But he's got some numbers on the side here that you probably saw in the video already of what the explanation was. But it was roughly 4,620 hours worth of work, roughly 50 pieces, including the gears and the headpiece that came later on. And then the original date that I got this all assembled and ready to go was on 5/2/20. So that's what the numbers mean, and I thought those numbers on the side were kind of a cool little personal Easter egg, if you will. If nothing else, it brings attention, what are these numbers, and then I can explain, and people so far have thought that was pretty cool. So I'm overall very pleased with how he turns out. He's got a nice little spot over here on my shelf above my TV. Yeah, this was a very fun project. Like I said earlier, it's always satisfying when you set yourself a goal of a big project and you make it all the way through the project, you know, like a 6-month or a year or whatever the case is. Obviously, the longer the project, the more satisfying it is when it's finished. And now I've got a really cool sidekick robot to help me out in the shop whenever I'm out here working. This is the longest video I've ever made, so if you enjoyed it, please hit the like and subscribe to see all the stuff that's coming up very soon. I got a lot of stuff coming. But other than that, Mother's Day is tomorrow, so happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there. Everybody stay safe and healthy as always, and we will catch you guys very, very soon.